As the United States entered World War II, there was a push by a number of African American writers at weekly papers toward integrating Major League Baseball teams. There were a lot of similarities between the approaches taken in both Cleveland and Detroit in the early part of the decade, but as the 1940s progressed, the results varied dramatically. As the Indians integrated and continued to add young black players, the Tigers' move toward integration would still be a number of years in the future. In 1942, as African American writers in Cleveland and other cities started to make the push for integration, writers with the Michigan Chronicle followed suit. Chronicle writers reached out to Detroit Tigers general manager Jack Zeller, but received less than desirable results when Zeller said that he had never seen any Negro ball player good enough for any of the white major leagues, and if any were developed to the required standard of the local team, he would have to think it over before giving an African American player a trial. Another article said that African American fans were so upset about this statement they threatened to boycott the Tigers' home games. The situation was diffused somewhat temporarily by John R. Williams, the editor of a local edition of the Pittsburgh Courier. He instead challenged the Tigers to a postseason game with a team comprised of Negro League All-Stars. Williams got in an additional jab when he pointed out that the Tigers had slim odds of winning the pennant and therefore would have plenty of time on their hands when the regular season ended. That same year, writers with the Column Post in Cleveland used a similar approach when they encouraged Indians owner Alva Bradley to integrate the team. They even helpfully made 3 suggestions from the Cleveland Buckeyes roster: third baseman Parnell Woods, outfielder Sam Jethro, and pitcher Eugene Bremer. The Indians mostly ignored their pleas, but then the 3 men coincidentally ended up playing in one of the East-West All-Star games that summer, the second game that was played in Cleveland after the first was played at Comiskey in Chicago. All 3 had uncharacteristically bad performances. Jethro even made an error on a simple play, and he was usually a flawless defender. Within days of the game, Bradley came out and said that he saw the men perform at the East-West game and none were major league material. It's unclear whether or not he was legitimately giving the players a chance to earn a spot on the Indians. It's entirely possible that he was sincerely considering the players prior to their bad outing. However, it's equally possible that he saw their performance as a convenient excuse. Here were the 3 players the Column Post suggested he sign, all 3 playing poorly together on the big stage. After Bradley's refusal to sign the players, the Column Post almost seemed more critical toward the players themselves and their inability to perform on a big stage than they did Bradley's snub. For all of the black press's efforts to push integration in Cleveland throughout the first half of the 1940s, they did not appear to have any direct influence over the actual signing of Larry Doby in Cleveland. Owner Bill Veeck quietly negotiated with the Newark Eagles and added Doby to the roster, seemingly before the black press even realized it was about to happen. Between July 5, 1947 and the end of the season, Doby did not get a ton of consistent playing time and struggled when he did make it into the game. There was a lot of debate about what would happen in 1948, whether or not Doby would remain with the team. A fear among a lot of the writers covering baseball for the African American press was that teams would integrate and then quickly resegregate. It's one of the reasons they encouraged teams to sign younger players, since physically their best years were ahead of them and they had an opportunity to hang around for a number of years. If owners were given any additional reasons to believe that integration was a hassle or unsuccessful, then black players would once again be locked out of the league. Writers with the Column Post argued that Doby didn't necessarily get enough of an opportunity in 1947 and pushed for increased playing time in 1948. He got that playing time and responded by turning into a solid contributor to a World Series winning squad. Doby was joined on the Indians in July of 1948 by legendary pitcher Satchel Paige, who both started and pitched out of the bullpen for the team down the stretch. When the Indians won it all in 1948, it was a vindication of many of the writers' arguments. Throughout the 1940s, they maintained that African American players would not just remain successful in their own rights, but that they could propel a team to a World Series victory. From there, it would be a domino effect of sorts. Other teams would sign black players when they realized that integrated squads performed better. White fans would become accustomed to cheering for black players to succeed, which could encourage their acceptance of integration in all aspects of society, not just baseball. In the first 2 years of integration, you had one integrated team reach the World Series in 1947 with the Dodgers, and then the Indians win one in 1948. It was powerful for support for their argument. They also had one very big symbolic example of this when there was a picture of Larry Doby and one of the white players on the Indians embracing after a win. And they said, this wasn't something that would normally happen, but it's on the front page of the paper and it's visible and it shows that there's harmony and the players were working together despite the fact that, there was an integrated squad. While one would think that other teams would eagerly jump at the chance to follow suit and sign black players, the road to integration would not be complete for many years. There were a few other teams that integrated not long after the Indians and Dodgers, but there were also teams that held out until the late 1950s before they added any black players. In a syndicated column by Fritz Pollard, he questioned as to why there were so many holdouts in the 1950s, pointing out that by 1953 only 6 teams had integrated, while 10 remained segregated. Pollard referenced the role of the black press in the 1950s and pointed out that the cities of the 10 holdouts had good African American papers, implying perhaps they once again needed to step forward and push for integration as they did in the 1940s. Pollard questioned why Detroit specifically had yet to integrate, saying, "If the Yankees can argue they haven't hired a Negro because they have consistently had a winning team and haven't been able to find a Negro capable of ousting any of the team's regulars, this certainly cannot be Detroit's argument." Pollard continued, "For a team that has only won 26 games up to last Saturday," and the column was written in late July, and the season with its total of 162 games more than half over, the manager should play anybody he can get. Even though the Tigers added an African-American player to their farm system toward the end of the 1953 season, writers argued that there was still a lot more work to be done. The Indians continued to sign and scout young black players in the 1940s and early 1950s, but even they happened to take a step back when it came to integration. In 1951, the Indians had several young black players, Luke Easter, Harry Suitcase Simpson, and Minnie Minoso, along with the now veteran Larry Doby. There were fears that perhaps white fans would be uncomfortable with 4 black players on the roster. Obviously, Doby wasn't going to go anywhere, so the Indians had to pick one of the other 3 to be traded. Minoso hadn't gotten much playing time with the team, but the Indians were hesitant to trade Easter or Simpson because of their power potential. Minoso ended up having a breakout season with the White Sox in 1952 after he was traded, while the Indians finished just 2 games back of the Yankees for the American League pennant that season. It's entirely possible that if Minoso remained with the Indians and got regular playing time, he may have helped put the team over the top for the American League pennant. It was a sad moment for a team that had so far been more racially progressive than most other squads. The fact that they integrated and it helped them win games, now they're purposely sending players away and they're losing games because of that. In addition to integrating the roster in the 1940s, the Indians also integrated the press box, the vendors, and the public relations staff. But 5 years post-integration, now the team felt a bit pushed to the limit by the number of black players on the team. There were several reasons suggested for why the Tigers happened to drag their feet for so long when it came to signing an African-American player. One thing that was mentioned was the fact that the Tigers had 5 first or second place finishes in 7 seasons between 1944 and 1950. If you're a successful team, it was easier to ignore integration, arguing that your team was good enough as it was. Another suggested cause was the racism of owner Walter Briggs, who staunchly avoided signing any black players prior to his death in 1952. Not only did the team refuse to integrate at the major league level, but prior to Briggs' death, they did not even sign black players to their minor league system. With no groundwork in place more than 5 years after the American League first integrated, it's no surprise that complete integration of all the major league squads were still a few years off. After Briggs' death, his son, Walter Jr., known as Spike, did sign several black players for the team's minor league system. As the 1950s progressed, black fans started to push back against the team's lack of progress when it came to integration. In 1958, the Briggs Stadium Boycott Committee threatened to boycott games should the Tigers fail to add a black player to the major league club. Despite the number of black players in the minor league system by 1957, Tigers leadership continued to argue that they would gladly put one of these players on the major league club if one was worthy. It seems odd, though, that other teams had no problem finding someone worthy to call to the majors, except for the Tigers and Red Sox, who were the final 2 holdouts. The Tigers finally relented and added Ozzie Virgil to the roster during the 1958 season. While Virgil had some success at first, it was clear that he was not an everyday player and actually did not make the team for the 1959 season. Another potential reason for why the Tigers felt they didn't have any viable young black players was that they made a number of scouting and recruitment mistakes throughout the 1950s. The Tigers either failed to perform out adequate scouting of the remainder of the Negro Leagues or of scouting of black players in general. They also managed to let Maury Wills get away from them when they released him at the end of spring training, only to see him join the Dodgers for the 1959 season and win the National League MVP within 3 years of his arrival. Virgil was a unique and complex figure when it came to integration. Born in the Dominican Republic, he moved to New York with his parents at the age of 13. Virgil played with the New York Giants in 1956, becoming the first player born in the Dominican Republic to play in the majors. By the time he arrived in Detroit, Virgil supposedly kept repeating the line, "I'm not Negro, I'm Dominican, I'm Spanish," while in the Tigers' dugout. A number of years after this, Frank Robinson described Virgil as a man regarded as black in this country, though not in his native land. There were critiques that the signing of Virgil was more of a half measure by the Tigers and that true integration wouldn't take place until a black player born in America made the team's roster. In 1959, there was a link to Cleveland that brought the team full circle when the Tigers traded Tito Francona to the Indians for Larry Doby. After the trade, Doby was enthusiastic about playing in Detroit, saying, "I wish I could have gotten this break a few years ago. I consider this move to Detroit as the second biggest break of my entire career." Part of the reason for his enthusiasm was that Bragg Stadium is considered a hitter's park. However, he told Willie Horton a number of years later that he originally planned to retire in 1959, but requested the trade to Detroit as, quote, "one last laugh at Walter Briggs." Doby, past the prime point of his career, only lasted 18 games with the Tigers. By the 1960s, Tigers had a number of black players established on the roster, but it took a long time to get to that point, especially considering some other teams had integrated almost 15 years earlier. Outfielder Gates Brown once claimed that racism pervaded the Tigers organization, saying, "They'd tell you jokes with the N-word in them while they were instructing you. You never opened your mouth." When outfielder Bill Bruton joined the Tigers in 1961 after a trade with the Milwaukee Braves, he pushed the team to address issues of discrimination at their Lakeland, Florida training site. Bruton claimed that he dealt with such prejudice early in his career with the Braves and wasn't prepared to do it again. The Tigers and Indians appeared to be on a somewhat similar trajectory in the early 1940s, with the African American press in both cities pushing for integration. But while the Indians integrated in 1947 and continued to add black players at the minor and major league level, the Tigers dragged their feet before they even integrated their minor league system and wouldn't integrate the major league team until 1958. There were a number of claims that the delay was thanks to pervasive racism within the organization throughout the 1950s, which inhibited scouting and slowed down a potential path to integration. While Cleveland added a number of young black players in the 1940s and early 1950s, they began to get nervous that white fans would not accept large numbers of black players. Thanks to those fears, they traded Minnie Minoso to Chicago when they could have used his help, specifically during the 1952 season. There is one final connection between the two teams, and that is pioneer Larry Doby integrated the Indians, then became one of the early black players with the Tigers in 1959. It's a good reminder that the changes made in 1947 did not alter the rest of the league overnight. It was a long, slow process that sometimes took a few steps backward for every step it took forward.